Welcome back to BelAhdan. We're talking about the latest raid on some of the anti-war activists and pro-Palestinian and pro-peace, as they say. And after talking to the FBI special agent, we're going to talk to one of the most active peace lover here in the Twin City. We all know Coleen Rowly. She is an former FBI. She is Time Magazine Woman of the Year. She is a whistleblower that we all know about her. She is always there and talking about peace. Welcome to BelAhdan, Coleen. And you heard Ralph. It was very gracious of him to come here and talk, represent the view of organization, and they're under a lot of pressure.
Absolutely. It's wonderful that you're giving the opportunity, frankly, because to do a good job in law enforcement, the FBI does have to maintain the trust and respect of the public. That's where they get information about true crime, so it's very important that what you're doing.
There is also that exception. Anything the FBI does, it's negative. I mean, we don't like law enforcement. We do. So tell us a little bit about the changes that happened, the freedom of speech and the First Amendment, and how can a nonviolent speech, a nonviolent support becomes material support for terrorist organization? What is this area there?
Well, you're right that ideally in a good functioning system of criminal law enforcement, you have people that are forthright and actually when they see something, they witness a crime, they come to the FBI or law enforcement. I have identified about 6 major things that are kind of going in the wrong direction right now. And with the recent raids on peace activists here in the Twin Cities, I think the main thing, and you spent a lot of time discussing this, it's the material aid to terrorism, the definition. This law originally came about in 1996, but then the Patriot Act it strengthened that provision by adding a couple of problematic words, which included expert advice or assistance. And I know you didn't really get into that, but that's the problematic.
I don't even know what that is.
Well, advice, of course, is speech. So you get cases, for instance, that were argued in the Supreme Court.
But you could advise him for doing something good.
That's right, that's right. In fact, this case, it was called Humanitarian Law Project, and the decision came down in June from the Supreme Court. It was actually argued that people like former President Jimmy Carter, who was trying to monitor election fraud in countries. I thought of some other examples, missionaries, people like Greg Mortensen, who actually now has met with members of the Taliban.
3 cups of tea.
Right, and in what the test case itself was a group in California called Humanitarian Law Project that wanted to conduct nonviolent conflict resolution with the PKK, a group in Turkey. So the test case itself that went up and the decision came down was on this level of mere advocacy, and certainly it was not advocacy of terrorism. Now the Supreme Court had this problematic finding that even speech could be considered assistance. And so that's where I would say that's the most direct root of this problem.
Is there any indictment for this? Is there anybody was indicted because of nonviolence?
Well, the decision just came down in June, and even then it was hoped that no one would go up to that line that said mere advocacy. But I'm going to quickly touch on some of these other factors. The next factor is that the Attorney General guidelines that were put into place after the Church Committee. There were guidelines for every crime program, and basically they mandated varying levels of justification, factual justification, in order to target a group. And you remember back in the 60s, they targeted Martin Luther King. So this was the fix to that. Those guidelines were almost immediately loosened after 9/11. You remember Ashcroft saying you can send an FBI agent into a mosque. So then they got more.
Are there, I'm telling you.
They got more and more loosened to the point in 2008 where they were just done away with.
Is there an illegal oversight for this?
Well, that's my sixth factor. You're jumping ahead.
So you got one. So go for the.
That's a very good point. Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board was the subject of 3 of 41 recommendations by the 9/11 Commission, because they foresaw that given these greater authorities under the Patriot Act to investigate, that there would be a need for oversight. And guess what happened to that Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight? Within a year and a half or so, Bush was forced to create it, and then he pulled the rug out from underneath it. And you know, even with Obama, they have never put into place new people. So it's just become, it died on the vine entirely. And it's actually in a statute. There's supposed to be one, a privacy. And in theory, the way that would work is if let's say torture, you know, let's say that in the CIA they were waterboarding. In theory, someone who saw that would have an outlet. They'd be able to go to their Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board and say, hey, I wonder if this waterboarding is right and legal. But that doesn't even exist right now. So that's, and we haven't touched on 3 other factors,
okay.
But there's a whole bunch of things.
So let's go for the second 3.
Well, the other thing is the blurring of protest with terrorism. And you saw this now, you see it in many directives, but I even myself made a complaint back in the fall of 2003 when the FBI put out an intelligence bulletin 89 targeting the anti-war marches that fall, of course, after Iraq War had started, and the FTAA in Miami. And the problem with that bulletin was that it listed some activities that are mere free speech activities, things like contacting lawyers and fundraising, things like this. So, you know, again, if you're going to go to these lines, it's very difficult. We have to sympathize. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a really tough job to find and detect true terrorists.
And I think a legal oversight will make the FBI job much easier. I think they'll have to interpret everything themselves then.
That's right. It would, you know, and I don't know what the reason for, this is the presidential level that has not filled those seats in the privacy. But I would think, yes, everybody would want that to be the case because they would want to be careful. And certainly they, you know, especially now with the FBI, they've had about 4 or 5 findings of different abuses. A few years ago, they found that they were serving national security letters on making mistakes in these letters, and then also not, you know, kind of in an indiscriminate way, not really even reviewing the evidence. But the blurring of protest with terrorism is kind of a natural corollary. People think, well, if you're against the war on terror, that somehow then you're on the side of the terror, which is
association, guilt of association.
And you have non-governmental people like Greg Mortensen's a perfect example. Missionaries, all kinds of people who would love to see violent actions reduced, and yet they're now chilled in their speech because they would be worried certainly about the running afoul of this Patriot Act
I feel
provision.
this is moving from war on terrorism to war on beliefs.
Well, that's another, you just came up with it, the preemptive. Now, since 9/11, there is this recognized need to preempt all acts of terrorism. And when you're put in that mode, I keep thinking back to organized crime. You know, if we had been given a green light in New York City in the 80s to preempt all violence from organized crime, you can just imagine what would have gone on. Because we knew, of course, John Gotti was a killer. But you can't.
That's the price of living in New York.
That's right.
To take it.
And you have to be very careful that you have really solid evidence. I give a whole talk on civil liberties and how you can do this actually to the extent possible the right way. And you do have to have levels of factual justification before you can take those initial steps. And intrusive investigations, things like monitoring people's emails and whatever, of course, in the old days, that was believed to require a high level of factual justification. After, you know, Bush administration comes in, what do? Immediately began warrantless monitoring with no level. And, you know, it's counterintuitive.
I'm in trouble now.
People think that quantity over, you know, quantity of information will somehow protect them. They think this
is the Walmart mentality, and
right.
I think I give all the blame on the Walmart culture, quantitatively. Better than
and what comes with that, too, is excess secrecy. I mean, a certain amount of temporary secrecy is necessary in law enforcement. You cannot tell the people you're investigating that you're investigating them. Absolutely correct. But what we've seen after 9/11 is this really excessive secrecy. And, you know, it breeds distrust.
We have we have half a minute here. I don't know. Do you sleep? Do you get...
No, I I stay out. I have to finish this piece because I'm hoping...
Half a minute to finish it.
Yeah.
But is there anything in that piece of, that you haven't covered yet?
Well,
have you covered the 6 points yet?
I haven't quite covered all of them.
Okay. So what for the time being, and you heard Mr. Bolter when he came here, and are you optimistic about developing this to bring America back?
I'm not that...
The good America, not the bad one.
The war fever, again, this kind of, it pervades, this kind of fear and hate. You mentioned Glenn Beck, and I don't see that going back. I don't see that going in the right direction at all. And as long as that is existing as an umbrella, I think we're in trouble. And it does require solid, sane
Thank you so much. I think both of you are doing a wonderful job. Everybody doing his part in this country, and that's what this country is all about. Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all.